Mom banned me from her wedding for drama. She crawled back when her groom bailed. I knew it would be bad, but I didn't think it would be this bad. My mother was always a woman who wanted to be in the center of attention. She always wanted to look younger, more beautiful, more desirable. Her fear of growing old was so strong that it determined her every choice in life. And when Alex appeared, I realized that she had crossed the line from which there was no return. He was in his early 30s. He had an undeniable charm that made women forget about their own common sense. I noticed how his compliments made my mother's eyes sparkle, how she laughed when she felt especially beautiful, and how easily she let him spend her money, convinced that true love has no price. This new romance became a kind of lifeline for her, a way to feel alive and desirable, even if it was only an illusion. I kept my thoughts to myself for a long time, knowing that she was not ready to hear the truth. She didn't want to see Alex leave her alone in the moments when she needed support. One evening, when she announced her intention to marry Alex, I felt that I could no longer remain silent. Inside me, I was seething with thoughts that this was not love, but only a cheap performance, where her feelings dissolve every time she walks away from him, leaving him alone, and his attention is directed not to her but to the young waitresses in the restaurants where she accompanies him. However, instead of trying to tell her the truth, I kept my words to myself, realizing that she did not want to hear what I had in mind. She was confident in her new happiness, believed that this affair with Alex would open a new chapter in her life, and refused to let my influence spoil this beautiful, albeit wasteful, image of her future. The wedding was coming up, and my mother chose the most expensive restaurant in town, invited the best decorators, and bought a dress that cost as much as my car. I was waiting for her to change her mind and realize her mistake, to realize that true happiness cannot be bought and cannot be based on external glitter alone. However, she remained steadfast in her decision. Over time, it became clear that her beliefs had not changed, and she made a firm decision to exclude me from her wedding day. She believed that my presence only carried the potential for drama that could ruin her celebration, and finally rejected me as someone who had always been a convenient tool for her needs. It was painful for me to realize that for years I had been the one who supported her in difficult times, when she was feeling down, when her previous relationships ended in disappointment. When she needed help, I was always there, ready to provide support and help. However, when the time came to voice my opinion and warn her that her choice could backfire on her, she rejected me without any effort, as if my opinion was useless to her. She decided that there was no place for me in her new life, even if it meant that I would be left alone. Heartbroken, the feeling of betrayal that gripped me at that moment was unbearable. I had no intention of pleading or making her think twice. My determination was uncompromising. I could no longer tolerate the irresponsible attitude she was demonstrating. However, she did not yet realize that her worst day was just beginning. This moment of disappointment was just a preface to what was to come, and my inner voice was already warning me that the future would bring real punishment for all those years of indifference and betrayal. Thus, the beginning of my mother's wedding day, which promised to be a celebration of joy and new feelings, turned into a symbol of the destruction of our family unity. All the love that I had tirelessly given was rejected, and I was left alone with a feeling of bitter sadness, knowing that my mother had chosen a path that would ultimately bring her only temporary satisfaction, and I would be outside of her new life. This day was the beginning of a new chapter, where every wound and disappointment turned into a driving force that led me to discover my own strength and dignity, despite all the insults and rejection. I thought it couldn't get any worse, that there is nothing more painful than the moment when your own mother erases you from her life. But the real betrayal was still to come. After that conversation, I tried to calm down, convincing myself that maybe she didn't mean to offend me on purpose. Perhaps she was just so blinded by her love that she didn't realize how much her actions hurt me. I kept telling myself that it was temporary, that she would burn out, realize she was wrong, and come back to me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that she had made her choice, and that choice was not in my favor. It was hard for me to accept that the person I had always supported considered me a problem, that her new husband was more important to her than me, that she had refused my presence on the most important day of her life without any remorse, as if I had never been a part of her world. The days dragged on for a long time. I saw her posts on social media, saw photos of her beaming with happiness, posing with Alex in expensive restaurants, choosing napkins, flowers and wine lists. Her friends wrote in their comments about how she deserved a new happiness, how great she looked, how lucky she was to find true love. It was as if she was trying to create a perfect picture to erase any doubts. I didn't write to her or call her. She was also silent. But one day my aunt called me. She sounded worried. She did not understand what was happening and asked why I would not be at the wedding. She was told that I didn't want to come because I didn't approve of my mother's choice. It was like a punch in the face. I didn't explain anything, just changed the subject. A few days later I heard even more. It turned out that my mother was telling everyone that I turned away from her because I was jealous, that I couldn't accept the fact that she had a new man, that I didn't want to see her happy. She even said that I was trying to turn her against Alex out of selfishness. It was so ridiculous that I didn't know how to react. People who had known me all my life now looked at me as a moody daughter who couldn't accept that her mother wanted to be happy. I went through all her posts again. There was not a single hint of me, not a single mention that she had a daughter. It was as if I had never existed. The wedding was coming up. I thought she would at least make an attempt to talk to me, but it didn't happen. She was too busy with her own life, her own beautiful illusion, where there was no room for someone to remind her of reality. I should have gotten used to it. But I didn't know that the real blow was yet to come. One evening, an old friend of my mother's wrote to me. She asked if I had arrived and if I was okay. I didn't understand what she was talking about and asked her to explain. Her answer made me shudder. It turned out that my mother had told everyone that I was going to fly to the wedding at the last minute. That I refused at first, but now that I saw how happy she was, I changed my mind and was ready to support her. That I had decided to put aside my childhood grievances and do what was right. I read the message several times, not believing my eyes. She hadn't just cut me out of her life. She had used me to create another beautiful myth about herself. I imagined her telling this story to her friends, portraying me as a person who had finally realized she was right. How she paints a picture of forgiveness, atonement, reconciliation. And then I imagined what would happen if she didn't actually see me there. The thought made me shudder. I knew she would not recognize the truth. She would find an excuse. Maybe she would say that I changed my mind at the last minute, that I was scared, that I let my whims control me. Again. And it would be lie after lie, the distorted versions of reality that she had been so skillfully creating all her life. Only this time I wasn't going to be silent. For the first time in a long time I felt something like determination. This story was not over yet. The wedding day came. I imagined everything happening. Guests in expensive outfits, my mom in a white dress, Alex with a fake happy smile. I could have sat among them if I had just agreed to close my eyes to everything. But I wasn't there. I tried not to think about it until I received a text from my aunt. Her words were confusing, but I understood the main thing. Something had gone wrong. First, I didn't react. What could have happened at a wedding where everyone was supposed to be celebrating? I hoped it was just a minor misunderstanding. Maybe a small incident or just nerves. Maybe my mom was going to cry again, but then everything would be resolved and everything would be fine. However, something inside me told me that the situation could be more serious than I thought. I opened social media in the hope that I would see at least a few first pictures. I expected to see a photo of my mother in a white dress, everyone excited, a new husband by her side. Enthusiastic comments from the guests about how beautiful everything was, how great the bride looked, how lucky she was to find her love. Maybe a few selfies with the guests, dancing and warm words. But nothing happened. Not a single hint that the wedding had taken place. No posts, no photos, no traces of happiness. This alarmed me even more. I could not leave it unanswered. I made a call to my aunt. She spoke quickly, almost choking. On her words, the wedding was off. Alex disappeared an hour before the ceremony. He just left the hotel and never came back. My eyes could not believe what I was hearing. All I could think of were questions. Why? Why? How could this happen? It was a shock. My mom had been waiting for him to the last minute, hoping that everything would be like clockwork. And then he disappeared, leaving her in complete despair. Later it turned out that he had left with some young girl, a guest of his friends. This was another hard truth that my mother had to accept. She was crushed. Everything she had believed in for the past months had collapsed in an instant. I didn't know what to feel. I would like to say that I sympathized with her, that I felt sorry for. Or I should have felt at least a little pity. But the first thing I felt was something completely different. I thought about how she had betrayed me, how she had cut me out of her life for a man who didn't even consider it necessary to stay by her side at least until the end of the day. How her empty promises, her words about happiness and love that she repeated so incessantly, were worthless in front of the real attitude that her other half had. I couldn't just forget how she turned her back on me, how she turned a blind eye to my feelings, to everything I was going through because of her choice. Now that she was in a situation where her love was not what she expected, where there was no gray ray of hope, I could not do what she expected of me. It was hard for me to say that I was sorry for her pain. I didn't feel sorry for her. Several hours passed before she called me. I saw her name on the screen. For the first time in a long time, she was looking for me on her own. Usually I was the one who called her, the one who cared, who talked to her, who supported her when another man left her to fend for herself. But now everything changed. I could answer the phone. I could pick up the phone and hear her crying, trying to explain, asking for my support. I could have heard her voice and realized that she still needed me, needed my help, wanted me to be there for her. But I just looked at the phone and didn't press the button. I didn't know why, but at that moment I decided that I wasn't going to do it. Maybe it was my way of justice. Maybe I just couldn't suffer anymore because of her choice, and I couldn't be the one to turn a blind eye anymore. I didn't want to be her salvation after she chose betrayal and manipulation over truth and love. I was not ready to forgive her choice. I wasn't ready to reject all my feelings and return to her world, where I was always an extra element. I thought it was the worst thing that could happen. I was wrong. The phone rang again and again. The vibration echoed in the silence of the room like a demand, like a call to return to the place I had already left. I could have answered it, could have heard her voice, full of tears and despair. But I did not answer. My hand trembled as I looked at the screen. My mother's name glowed red, and I knew she was in the same state as me. But I couldn't answer. Not yet. Few hours passed, then a day. She stopped calling. I knew she was suffering, I imagined. Her sitting in her gorgeous wedding dress in the middle of an expensive hotel room with her makeup smeared, surrounded by the remnants of her shattered happiness. She was alone. Alex, her perfect man, had abandoned her for one of the most important moments of her life, and now she was experiencing the disappointment of her own choosing. I could imagine her sitting there, crushed with grief, trying to understand what had happened. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her. But then I remembered the moment she turned away from me. When she chose him over me. When she didn't care how I felt. She didn't want me at her wedding, but now that her perfect life had fallen apart, she remembered my existence again. She needed me only when she was left without support, without someone she could choose. These thoughts hurt. They were like stakes in my heart, and I couldn't forgive them so quickly. I tried not to think about it. I was distracted by something else. Maybe it was just a sense of justice that I had to get at least some kind of victory in this situation. I was the one who had always chosen her, and now she was turning to me. But it wasn't just a matter of pride or cruelty, it was pain. Pain that I couldn't just ignore. A few more days passed. She disappeared from social media. I noticed that there were no more posts, no photos, no hints that her life was going on in any way. I knew from her guests that she did not leave the house, hardly spoke to anyone. Her pride did not allow her to admit to everyone that she was a victim of her own blindness. Now she was alone with her mistakes, and I was alone with what was left behind. She must have realized that this was her last chance. And she came. It happened in the evening. Felt tired. The night was quiet, as if everything around me was waiting for something. I was sitting on the couch, and suddenly I heard someone standing outside the door. Slow footsteps, as if the person did not know whether to knock. The same rhythm I remembered from my childhood, when she always came to me to apologize or explain her actions. I didn't open the door right away. Time seemed to stand still, and I had no clear decision. Then I realized that she would still be standing there until she got at least some kind of sign from me. I slowly got up and opened the door. She was standing on the threshold. She looked different. It seemed that she had aged 10 years in these few days. Her eyes were empty. Her hair was carelessly gathered without the usual styling and makeup. This was not the woman who was celebrating her new, perfect life just a few days ago. This was the mother I had once known, but did not recognize now. I looked at her, not knowing what to say. My words seemed to be blocked. Silence became an invisible wall between us. She was silent, but her eyes spoke more than any words. Felt her eyes asking for forgiveness, but I didn't know if I was ready to accept it. She was asking for forgiveness. She asked me not to leave her. I could see how hard it was for her to say these words, how she was ready to give up just to regain what she had lost. But I was no longer the one who always lends a shoulder. I was no longer ready to be her support when she fell back into the trap of her choices. My heart didn't beat the way it used to. I felt empty. I didn't know what to say, and I didn't know if there was a right decision in this situation. My soul was in despair, but not because I couldn't be with her. I was desperate because she was my mother again, but I was no longer her daughter. She stood on the doorstep, silent, broken, without a hint of her former confidence. She had once been the center of attention, the woman who always knew what to say, how to look, how to control the situation. She was always proud of her strength, her charisma, her ability to control people. She built her life so that everything revolved around her, and she was sure that everything would always be exactly as she wanted it to be. And now she was standing in front of me, as if for the first time she didn't know what to do. There was no arrogance in her eyes that she used to look at me with, nor was there the confidence with which she had chased me out of her wedding because I was supposedly ruining her perfect day. Instead, it was something else. Fear, despair, emptiness. I could have felt sorry for her. I could have invited her inside, made her tea, listened to her confession as I had done before. I could have been the one to pull her out of the hole she had fallen into. But this time I just looked at her in silence. Her hands were trembling. She was breathing heavily, as if even speaking was difficult for her. Her shoulders shook slightly, and her eyes darted from side to side, as if she was trying to gather her thoughts. I could understand her, but not now. Not after what she had done to me. Eventually she spoke. Her voice was weak, broken. She almost whispered, as if she was afraid of her own words. She told me how Alex disappeared a few hours before the wedding. How the guests had already gathered, how everything was ready. Flowers, music, luxurious. Tables, champagne. How she stood there in her expensive dress, confident that the best day of her life was about to begin. And then the realization came. Alex hadn't shown up. At first she thought he was late, that something had happened, maybe a problem with transportation. She called him, but his phone was off. Minutes passed, and the guests began to whisper. She ran around the venue looking for someone who could explain what was going on. But no one knew anything. Then someone said they saw Alex leaving the hotel with a suitcase. The moment she realized that he was gone, that he had simply run away, was the greatest humiliation of her life. She tried to hide her panic, to force herself to remain calm, but her heart was pounding and her legs were shaking. The guests looked at her with pity. Some tried to console her, others just watched the tragedy that was happening right before their eyes. And she was in the center of this tragedy, and her perfect life was simply falling apart. She didn't know what to do. And then the questions began. Where is the groom? What happened? Did she know about it in advance? She didn't know what to say. It was a new experience for her, when everyone she considered part of her world began to doubt her choice. She was left alone, surrounded by people who did not know what to do. She had to get up on stage and announce that the wedding was off. She doesn't remember how she said those words. She doesn't remember how the guests started to leave, some nodding in understanding, others rushing out to discuss her failure behind her back. And she was left alone, just like I was once. And then came the moment when she was alone in a huge hall. The luxurious decor, the festive tables, the half-drunk champagne. It all seemed eerie and meaningless. It was her greatest humiliation, and no one could take away her pain. She was afraid to leave that room, knowing that questions, stares, pity would be waiting for her. She did not know where to go. And here she is, in front of me. She expected me to feel sorry for her. She expected me to rush to support her, as I had done all my life. She wanted me to tell her that everything would be fine, that it wasn't her fault, that he was a scoundrel and she deserved better. She wanted me to come back into her life as if nothing had happened. But this time I just looked at her. In her eyes I saw not so much suffering as emptiness. It was not the woman I remembered. She was just a person who had made a choice and was now responsible for it. I did not wish her harm. I didn't want her to suffer. But this situation was natural. I knew it would happen. She did not want to listen. And here she is asking for forgiveness, asking me, come back. But do I really want to? Maybe I was ready to forgive her, but not like that. Not because of her pain. Not because she needs support again. I couldn't go back to that. She stood in front of me, as if waiting for some sign, a gesture, at least a hint that I would forgive her, that everything would return to the way it was before. Her eyes were moist, her shoulders were slumped, her voice trembled as she tried to say something. But I remained silent. I felt that she was waiting for the very moment when I would step forward, open my arms to her, tell her that she was not alone, that I was there, that I would help her through this shame, pain, humiliation. 'Cause it has always been like that. She had hurt me, thrown me out of her life, abandoned me the moment I told her the truth. And yet now she stood there, as if nothing had happened, as if our relationship had not been shattered by her blindness and pride. She told me how she had been overcome with fear when she realized that Alex was not coming back. How she tried in vain to find at least some trace of him on social media, in his apartment, among his friends. But he was gone. He disappeared as quickly as he had appeared in her life, leaving her with humiliation, shattered illusions, and emptiness. She was afraid to go out, knowing that people would gossip, that her humiliation had become a public spectacle. The wedding, which was supposed to be her triumph, turned into a farce that will now haunt her for the rest of her life. She said she was sorry, that she realized how much she had offended me, that she was blind, obsessed, that she allowed herself to be deceived. Her voice was breaking, she was almost begging. She told me how she was left all alone, how none of the friends who had gathered at her luxurious wedding stayed to support her. Her friends did not call, did not ask how she was doing. They were there for the spectacle, for the glitter, for the opportunity to enjoy her celebration. But when that shine faded, when only disappointment and shame remained, they simply disappeared. Now she had no Alex, no money, no support. And that's why she came to me. I listened to her tell me all this, as she tried to find excuses for herself again and again. But all I felt was tired. I was exhausted from playing the role of her support all my life. From the fact that she came to me again not because she appreciated me but because she needed support again. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel a desire for revenge. Just nothing. So I did not do what she expected. I didn't comfort her. I didn't invite her inside. I didn't try to console her. I just told her that I couldn't help her this time. She looked as if I had hit her. Her lips were trembling, her eyes were filled with tears. Couldn't believe that I was refusing to be her lifeline. She asked if this meant I didn't want to see her anymore. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to hate her. I didn't want to cut her out of my life. But I didn't want to be the one she only came to when things went wrong. I didn't want to be a backup anymore. Maybe someday I would find the strength to forgive her. But not now. She left slowly without looking back, and I knew that was the moment that changed everything. Closed the door. And for the first time in a long time I felt relieved. I was no longer her shadow. I was no longer the one saving her from the consequences of her own decisions. I was just me. Perhaps for the first time in my life I really felt free. But was it the right thing to do? This is the question that stayed with me when I stood in front of the mirror and looked at my reflection. With my decisions I changed not only her life but also mine. Could I have done things differently? Maybe it would have been easier to support her, but would it have been real support if I had become her support again, which had no strength? I could no longer be her weak point. And it was a great discovery for me to be strong for myself, not for someone else. Several months passed after she walked out my door. We were out of contact. I continued to live my life, trying to find peace after everything had changed. And although at first glance it seemed that this was the end of our story, I felt that something else remained unspoken, unresolved. She called me one day. Her voice was calmer, more measured, without the despair I had heard before. She suggested a meeting. I knew it would not be a meeting like all the others. It was a conversation between two people who had grown up, changed, and would probably never be the same again. We met in a cafe, without any huge emotions or expectations. She came back with her usual look, no extra shine, but there was something new in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. We started talking like two people who realize that everyone has their own mistakes, their own paths that lead to understanding themselves. We did not discuss everything that had happened before, did not try to justify or explain. Was clear that we had both gone through important changes. I was no longer her support. And she was no longer a shadow from the past that required support only in moments of weakness. We were simply two individuals who understood each other in a new way. And although I was not ready to return everything as it was, I realized that sometimes it is important to give people a chance to change, not for myself but so that they can restore themselves. Our relationship was no longer the same, but that didn't mean that there was no understanding between us. It was a new beginning. Not a recreation of the past, but a transition to a new level of mutual respect, where we could be for each other without demanding more than we could give to each other. And although we were no longer the same people we once were, we became two people who could communicate without facing those old grievances and demands. We were able to find a common language that I was ready to live with, without any illusions, but with a real understanding that everyone has their own way